Blessed is the man who was not in the counsel of the wicked.
Hi everyone, Christ is risen. This is our second session of virtual Sunday school since we can't be in person at St. George. We're bringing the church to you. We're gathering together to study the Bible in our own homes. If you didn't get to watch last week's lesson, it'll be linked in the Sunday school email list as well as on the St. George YouTube page. Last week, for those of you who did get to watch, we talked about the story of Adam and Eve, a story we're all probably familiar with. Just to review a bit about what we talked about, we heard that Adam and Eve were the first two people that God made. He made them and he made their home the Garden of Eden, a paradise where human beings could live in the way that God meant them to live. And the life that he promised them to live was an everlasting life. They could live forever with God in paradise. God also made Adam and Eve with free will, because he makes them free to live their life however they want. They can make whatever choice they want. They can choose good things or they can choose bad things. But because sometimes we choose things that hurt us or are bad for us, God gives us some rules which protect us from bad decisions. A rule that he gives Adam and Eve is to avoid eating the fruit of only one tree in the garden. They could eat fruit from all the other trees, but there's this one tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and they're not supposed to eat that fruit because it says, the day that you eat of the fruit of this tree, you shall surely die. Now, besides Adam and Eve, there was another creature in the garden, a snake, an evil snake, and he was very jealous of Adam and Eve and the life which God promised to them. So the snake goes and tempts Adam and Eve, telling them there's nothing wrong with the fruit of that tree. It's probably very delicious and you should try it. So they eat the fruit, and just like God warned them, they lost their everlasting life because of that. Because of this, they had to leave the Garden of Eden. And this is where we leave off. The story we have today picks up there. Adam and Eve have left the garden, and they've made their home outside of Eden now. And they start a family together, and they have two sons, Cain and Abel, who we're going to hear about today. So again, the book that I'm using, if you want to follow along with it at home, is this one which we usually use in the Sunday school. It's a children's study Bible. And the story today we're going to be reading, like I said, is Cain and Abel on page 14. Adam and Eve settled in a land east of Eden. There Adam worked the soil, bringing forth herbs and grain for them to eat. And soon Eve gave birth to a boy, whom they called Cain. In time, Adam and Eve had a second son, whose name was Abel. Now Abel grew up to be a shepherd. All day long he would follow his flock, letting his sheep graze through the hills and the meadows, and keeping them safe from harm. The family would often eat of the meat that he brought home, and Eve would make clothes and blankets from the sheep's wool. Now Cain grew up to be a farmer like his father Adam. He worked in the fields from daybreak until nightfall, separating the green shoots and the golden stalks from the sharp thorns and the nettles that twisted around them. And when he came home at night, he was tired, his body ached, and his hands were soiled and rough. Sometimes, wrapped in sheepskin, he would lie awake in the moonlight, wondering why his father never complained about the hard work that they had to do. Much harder work, Cain thought, than the work of a shepherd, than the work of his brother Abel. Adam and Eve often thanked God for the two children he had given them. In Eden they had spoken with God directly, but now they had a new way to show thanks. This was called the sacrifice, a gift to God of something that was precious to them. To offer their sacrifices, Adam and Eve built an altar of stones, and on the altar they made a fire, and to this fire they brought their gifts to God. As the flames rose from the altar, they could see their gifts going up towards the heavens. And when the time came for the two brothers to make their own offerings to God, Abel laid on the altar a fat lamb, a fat young lamb, the best of his flock. and the flames leaped high, and the fat crackled, and Abel knew that his gift was pleasing to God. Then Cain brought to the altar the fruits of his harvest, grain and green herb from the fields. And even as he knelt there, impatiently waiting for God to accept his gift, a steamy smoke choked off the flames. Now, seeing that God had taken Abel's offering but not his own, Cain hardened his heart against his brother. And God said to Cain, "Why are you so angry, and why do you look so sad? Know now that if you do well, your gift will yet be accepted. But if you do not do well, then evil lies waiting at the door. For though evil wishes to rule over you, you may yet be its master." But God's words did not soften Cain's heart. They did not soften Cain's anger. Every time he thought about Abel and the reward he got of Abel's gift to God, hatred filled his heart like a raging fire. And one day, hiding his true feelings, Cain lured Abel to a lonely field, and there rose up against his brother and killed him. And God cried out to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" "I do not know," Cain answered. "Am I my brother's keeper?" And God knew that Cain had killed Abel, and said to him, "What have you done? I can hear your brother's voice calling to me from the ground." Then God cursed Cain, saying, "Now you are more foul than the ground you stained with your brother's blood. No more shall you be a farmer, for the soil shall yield nothing to you. You shall become a homeless wanderer over the face of the earth." And hearing this, Cain said, "O Lord, my crime is great, but the punishment is more than I can bear. You turn your face from me, and you force me to leave the land where I was born. Wherever I go, people will look at me and say, 'There goes Cain, an evil man. He killed his own brother. Let us kill him too.' And the Lord heard Cain's plea and said, 'I will put a mark upon your forehead, to let everyone know that whoever kills you receives a punishment 7 times worse than your punishment for killing Abel. This mark will protect you, but it will also remind you wherever you go of the great crime that you have committed.' So Cain left the land of his birth and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. There he lived and married and had a son named Enoch, and bore God's mark on his forehead to the end of his days." So one of the things that I always thought about when I heard this story is, why would God accept Abel's sacrifice but not Cain's? Did God really care what people brought to him? Did he care if what you bring to him is a lamb or if it's some fruit? Definitely not. God cares more about the thoughts and the feelings that you bring with your sacrifice. Those are your true sacrifice. That's what you really offer to God, is when you give graciously and willingly. Abel did his best, and Abel gave his best. He picked the best lamb from his flock, and he gave it willingly and happily. And that is what was important to God. But Cain, on the other hand, spent all his time complaining about the hard work he had to do. He had to plant seeds and harvest the fields. His work was way too hard. And he judged his brother, saying, "Surely Abel's work is not as hard as mine. Surely a shepherd doesn't work as hard as a farmer." And we can assume, too, that when Cain gave his sacrifice to God, he didn't pick the very best fruits, like Abel picked the very best of his lambs. He didn't say to God, "God, I want to give you the best that I have to give." He said, "I'm going to give you maybe the worst that I have to give, or something that I don't really need that much." And because of this, Cain didn't really sacrifice anything at all. Like I said, God doesn't care if we give a lamb or, some wheat or some fruits or something like that. What's more important is the feeling that we have and the thought that we have when we give something. We should give something willingly. We should want to give something to God. And we should want to give him our very best, not our very worst. So we might think, well, maybe God was too hard on Cain. Maybe he was too cruel or angry at Cain. But that's not really true. God just told Cain, try better next time. You'll do better next time. Don't worry about it for this time. I'm not upset with you. Just next time give the best you can give. But Cain is still upset by this. He still is very jealous of his brother that God accepted Abel's sacrifice, but not his sacrifice. And he got so jealous to the point where one day Cain and Abel were out in the field, and Cain secretly went around and killed his own brother. So now we have things went from bad to worse. Cain didn't do what God asked him to do. Even when God tried to show Cain how he could do better and asked him to do better next time, Cain refused to listen. He lashed out at his own family out of jealousy. And instead of opening his heart to God and asking God for help and guidance, when God finally, he goes out and he kills his own family. And when God comes to confront him about this and say, "Where is your brother?" Cain rudely answers God, "Who am I, my brother's keeper?" So by saying this, Cain was trying to deny all of the bad things that he did, even to the point of denying that he killed his own brother, which we know God, already knows that, but he's asking to see what Cain will say. So this question, "Who am I, my brother's keeper?" Right? Cain had in his mind, "I'm not my brother's keeper. I don't have to worry about him." But the answer to this is, of course, yes. We are all our brother's keepers. There will be several times in our lives, I'm sure we can all think of a time, where we believe that we haven't been treated fairly. And sometimes that is true. But sometimes, like in Cain's case, our selfishness can make us blind to the fact that we did something wrong and we just can't see it. We refuse to accept it. Just for an example, just similar to Cain and Abel, I'm sure we can all think of a time where our siblings did something well and got a reward. Maybe, like when I was younger, if you did well on an exam, you would get some treat or reward from your parents when we were younger. And sometimes if you didn't do well, but you saw your sibling did well and they got a reward, you'll say, "Well, I know that I didn't do well, but I still want that reward, and I'm jealous of them because they got it. I'm even maybe upset with them because they got a reward." So sometimes this can be so bad that we wish something bad will happen to our sibling, right? We'll say, "I wish that, if the reward is, let's say, ice cream, I wish their ice cream would fall on the ground. So that way, if I don't have it, they can't have it either." Now, of course, this is wrong. We should always want the best for our brothers and sisters, not just to support them when good things happen to them, but also to offer them our own first and best fruits, like Abel offered to God. That we say, I'm not just going to support you when good things happen to you, but I'm going to give you whatever I have in order to help you. And that's what God wants with us, and that's what Abel did for God. And when we do this, we get closer to the life that God had meant Adam and Eve to live, a life where we are always thankful and grateful for what we have, and where we recognize that all good things come from God. Okay, that's, I think, good for this week. Next week we'll pick up again with the story of Noah's Ark. I'm sure many of you have already heard it, but we'll take a look at it. All right, thanks, guys.